Hi everyone, my name is Eleni Zamagias and I'm a student at Adelphi University. I will be presenting my poster on higher education response to the COVID-19 pandemic. The coronavirus pandemic became problematic for American universities that were forced to close. Institutions of higher education have refined and adjusted their response to public health crises for centuries. For example, in 14th century Europe, the Black Death spread rampantly, forcing institutions to close. Another example of this is in 1918, when the Spanish influenza pandemic led to a mandate to wear masks on many campuses, and holding classes outside became more common as a way to decrease the possibility of spread. In this study, the response of these institutions to defend the health and financial needs of all individuals involved during the early stages of the COVID-19 pandemic was examined. In addition, faculty and staff unions were explored in relation to the job security they provide amidst a public health crisis. Preliminary readings were conducted to compile the most pressing questions to ask. These questions were as follows. 1. How many days after the 100th reported US case, which was March 3rd, did the university respond? 2. When did the university impose mandatory move-outs for residents? 3. At what date did the university decide to move the semester fully online? 4. When did the university state respond? And this is measured by when they implemented a stay-at-home order. 5. How many faculty members were furloughed, laid off, or received pay cuts? Were they part of a union? 6. How many non-faculty members were furloughed, laid off, or received pay cuts? Were they part of a union? 7. Did the university create an emergency relief fund? And if they did, how? 8. Did the university give refunds for the spring semester? Was it for room and board or tuition? And lastly, 9. How has the school changed their admission policy for the fall 2020 semester? The Carnegie classification of institutions of higher education was used to compile a list of universities in the continental United States to sample from. The list was divided according to level of university and then by region. There were a total of 8 regions and 7 levels of university for a total of 56 strata. The 8 regions were New England, Middle Eastern, Great Lakes, Plains, Southeastern, Southwestern, Rocky Mountains, and Far Western. The 7 levels of university were doctoral universities, very high research activity, doctoral universities, high research activity, doctoral or professional universities, master's college universities with large programs, master's college universities with medium programs, master's college universities with small programs, and lastly, baccalaureate colleges. A total of 1,617 institutions were compiled across those 56 strata. A sample of 10% was taken for a total of 162 universities sampled, with each stratum sampled proportionately. A spreadsheet was created for each stratum. R was used to generate random numbers, and based on these, the institutions sampled were chosen. Then a Google Sheet document was created with a page for each school classification. All of the questions for each institution were answered between June 2020 and July 2020 using university bulletins and websites. First, we have on the top left the percentage of schools that created an emergency fund by category. This figure shows that most schools did not create an emergency fund for their students, which is indicated by the red blocks. On the top right, we have date decided to move semester fully online. The largest section for each of these bars is the yellow one, which indicates that most schools move their semester fully online between March 16th and March 20th. On the bottom of this section, we have refunds given for the spring 2020 semester. As we can see, more of the schools gave refunds for housing and dining, which is what was expected. We may be able to conclude from this that the institutions of higher education need to ensure their housing and dining costs in the future. Additionally, another interesting insight from this graph is that the only institutions that gave no refunds at all were baccalaureate colleges. This may be because these colleges usually have less funds to work with and are less financially stable than the other classifications of universities listed. For graphs related to faculty and staff, we first have on the top left layoffs and unionized status of faculty. In this graph, status 1 indicates those who were unionized and had no furloughs or layoffs, and status 2 is those who were unionized and had furloughs or layoffs. From these two bars, it is clear that unionized faculty were generally more protected from the financial impact of the pandemic. Status 3 is non-unionized and had no furloughs or layoffs, and status 4 is non-unionized but with furloughs or layoffs. Here we can see that more non-unionized faculty were subject to furloughs and layoffs than not. We have the same graph on the top right for staff using the same statuses as the previous graph. Here we see that for staff, that status 4 again has more schools than status 3, but status 2 is now greater than status 1, meaning that more staff who was part of a union were furloughed or laid off than not. These graphs can be synthesized and made more clear in the two graphs below, where the average number of faculty and staff furloughed or laid off per student is graphed. This takes into account the size of university and how many individuals were affected by this. From these graphs, it becomes more clear that for both faculty and staff, more non-union workers were affected than those who were a part of a union. I want to thank Dr. Josh Hiller for being my advisor and guiding me through this nearly year-long process. And also a warm thanks to Dean Susan Dinan and the Honors College Summer Research Fellowships for funding my summer research. Based on these findings, we can see that different institutions responded to the pandemic based on their location and finances. Also, unions seemingly protected both faculty and staff from being furloughed or laid off. Possible future research related to this would be to collect updated data and answer all of these questions again, making new graphs to reflect any changes in the findings, if there is any, since the data presented was taken early on in the pandemic. Another option would be to complete the experiment with a larger sample size. Feel free to email me with any questions or comments you may have on my research, and thank you for watching.